radio on the way in or who check their phones for headlines and stuff, but many of you have probably heard there's another shooting this morning, I guess, in Baton Rouge. Several more police officers who were shot, and 3 of them have passed away. And so there continues to be so much happening in our world, and it's overwhelming to think about. And so, obviously, our hearts are heavy for all sides and all folks involved in the tensions that are happening, and asking God to be what only He can be, which is the healer and the reconciler and the peacemaker that is His power. And so we pray for that. And in some ways, the message today is fitting around what's happened this morning and what's been happening, because as we're kicking off this series, Lies We Believe, we're talking about an idea that is never really explicitly articulated, but when it seeps in, as it has in so many corners of our culture, those ideas have consequences. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the consequences, and if there might be some other ways of viewing this popular misconception that is so widespread and subtly affects how we see each other, how we see ourselves. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. To get us started, though, I want to talk about this idea that sometimes there are ideas that really aren't that big a deal, but that we just get wrong. Growing up in the Wolfgang house in western Pennsylvania, we had a swimming pool in the backyard. It wasn't anything fancy, no fountains or waterfalls or palm trees. It's in Pittsburgh, all right, so what do you expect? And it was one of those like above ground 4-foot blue liner types. You know what I'm talking about? Really high end. But I couldn't have cared less, because pretty much every day from the day school let out until the day we had to go back, my friends and I in our neighborhood were in that pool. And there were very few rules about the pool. We would play in there for hours, and my mom would kind of let us do our thing. But there was one rule, hard and fast rule, when it came to the Wolfgang pool, and it was this: if you have eaten, you may not get in the pool for at least 30 minutes after you have eaten, right? Anybody else familiar with that rule? Oh, yeah. And the basic idea behind this was simple. The idea was that the fear was that as your body was digesting the Chef Boyardee mini raviolis that you had for lunch, right? That all the blood from your body was so concentrated on breaking that down that your arms and legs would seize up in cramps and you would sink to the bottom of the 4-foot pool and die, right? It's basically like death by beefaroni, basically is what it is, okay? And so out of sheer terror, the hard and fast rule was no exceptions, 30 minutes after you've eaten. In fact, we had a timer that we would set. I'm not kidding. We would set this timer, and that's when we knew it was okay for us to go in the pool. And for a long time, I held that as gospel truth. I, as many other parents, was preparing to pass this on to the next generation, right? And to ensure that I was not somehow complicit in the tragic drowning death of my child because they'd had a donut within that 30-minute window or something, right? But in my adulthood, I discovered something. My mom is a liar, right? Now, before you hate me, I love my mom, all right? We have a great relationship, and under this beard, I have a face only a mother could love, all right? So I'm eternally grateful for her. But there is no truth in the idea that if you swim an hour or a half hour after you've eaten, that your body is so busy digesting that you will sink to the bottom and die, all right? Especially not in a 4-foot pool, right? Okay? Now, throughout our lives, certain people give us ideas. And many of them are well-meaning people who love us. They tell us things that they believe, that they pass on to us. There are other messages that we sort of pick up from our culture or from what the prevailing wisdom of the day says. And sometimes we just absorb these things. We never stop and ask, wait a second. That has a certain air of truth to it. It sort of rings like it might be right. But is it really true? Is it really true? There are some ideas that are just bad ideas. And I have a little example of a bad idea for you. You want to see it? Take a look at this. That's a bad idea, right? Golly gee. By popular request, there he is in all his tartan glory. right? Anyway, aren't you glad it's not windy in Scotland? Isn't that a good thing? Now, for those of you who are new to North Shore, let me just say this is our senior pastor, Jonathan Alexander, up there, and he's spending some time on sabbatical, some time in Scotland and other parts of Europe, much deserved, and having a great time. So he texted me this picture this week, and I figured if I had to have this image seared into my brain, you did too, all right? So, and for the record, those who are new, he normally wears pants, all right? So let's just be clear about that. You can come back and feel safe. But anyway, so take that off the screen. We must get back to our focus here. Let's make that go away. Shake that out of your head. Anyhow, here's the bottom line. Some things are true, and some things aren't. And we have to become wise in identifying which things are and aren't right, which things are and aren't true. In fact, the Bible challenged us to do this very thing. Paul, in a couple of places, for instance, he says this in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world, rather than on Christ. What is he saying? Don't simply take what you're hearing as truth. Assess it, whether it's in a forum like this, or whether it's a different kind of forum. Listen carefully, guard yourself, be on the alert, because just because someone says something on the internet, or on TV, or with a microphone hanging from their ear, right? Doesn't automatically make it true. He gives the same caution to his young protege, this man he'd been mentoring, young man named Timothy, when in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 20 and 21, he says, Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to your care. Turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge, which some have professed, and in doing so have wandered from the faith. He says, careful, because this may sound legit. It might even sound like knowledge, like truth. But I want you to pay close attention. Whether it sounds true or not, examine it, question it, because ideas have consequences. What you believe will affect how you live. What you believe will affect how you treat other people. What you believe will affect what things you prioritize in your life, what really matters. What you believe will dictate where you put your time, where you put your resources, where you put your passions. And today, what we're going to talk about is this rarely overtly stated, but subtly, constantly reinforced lie that goes like this. You are just an accident. You're just an accident. Now, as I said, nobody says these words overtly, but there's this underlying premise that is widespread and accepted by our world. We're told essentially that we're products of random chance. We're basically nothing more than lucky dust at the end of it all. That billions of years ago, some atoms got together and they were energized by some sort of electrical charge or something, and that experience was somehow the catalyst that brought life into existence. And from there, things started growing. First, very basic forms of life, but then over billions of years, these became increasingly complex until they became coffee snobs and foodies, right? And the commonly held belief is that there is no master design behind all that we see. It's just the outcome of billions of years of random natural processes. And the consequence of that, the implication of that, is that if it's all accident, then it's all accident, including human life. It's essentially just lucky dirt. And there are a lot of people who believe that in the world. And an idea like that has consequences. Because when an idea like that creeps into our hearts, it is dangerously easy to, instead of responding to others as if they're people, to begin responding to others as if they're things. To forget that human being that you see, even if they look different than you, or believe different than you, or act different than you, or vote different than you, that they're just things, not human beings with value, to be treasured and nurtured and protected and helped when in crisis. These ideas have consequences. So is it true? Is it true? Could it be that there's another explanation that not only sheds light on why the world is the way it is, naturally speaking, but also sheds some light on that value and purpose in every human life? And I know when we start conversations like this about the origins of the universe and creation and evolution, there are a lot of different ideas that are out there. Even in this room, I know people here have good friends in this church who love Jesus and have studied this subject and have very deep convictions on this. They are absolutely convinced, based on the evidence that they believe in, that the earth was created in 7 24-hour periods, 7 24-hour days. Generally speaking, they fall into a camp that's referred to as young earth creationists. And they would estimate, based on some of the genealogies in the Old Testament, they would say, the earth is actually only about 6,000 years old, but different geological experiences, to all include in part potentially Noah's flood, have actually accelerated the aging of the earth and created things that appear to be much older. Now, there are many people who believe that very deeply. There are other groups of people who love Jesus, and they believe that it may not have been literally 7 24-hour days, that maybe God expanded it out over ages, because potentially the Hebrew word could be translated day or age, and that maybe it was a longer kind of a process. These people would affirm sort of microevolution, meaning this idea that species change and adapt within their species, but they wouldn't affirm macroevolution, which is the idea that species transition into other species. And these groups might be known as old earth creationists. But God is specifically involved and made human beings unique. I also have other friends who love Jesus. I don't question their faith. But they, through their study and the evidence that convicts them, they believe in what's known as theistic evolution. So they take many of the ideas that are promoted by Charles Darwin and those folks of that ilk, and they simply say that all of that happened because God designed it to happen, sort of set the conditions for that, and then let it unfold, using many of the natural selection processes detailed by Darwin and so on. I also have friends who think everything I just said, the last three groups, are absolute idiots, right? That anyone who believes in some sort of God and creation is some kind of ignorant, flat earth caveman whose religious beliefs have so blinded them to what they consider settled scientific facts that they don't even deserve the time of day. And sometimes those people all wind up in the same family. I heard about a little girl who asked her dad, she said, "Daddy, where do human beings come from?" And he explained, "Well, honey, God created Adam and Eve, and over the years, we're one of their descendants, all the way down to you and me. We descend from Adam and Eve." Interested in that answer, she went to her mom and said, "Hey, Mom, where do human beings come from?" And Mom explained that over millions of years, monkeys evolved into apes, and apes evolved into humans. And the girl was, of course, very confused by this. She didn't understand, so she went back to her dad, and she said, "Daddy, you said we're descended from Adam and Eve, but Mom says we're descended from apes. What's the deal?" And Dad said, "Well, honey, when you asked me, I was telling you about my side of the family. When you asked Mom, she's telling you about hers," right? We're not going to resolve those issues today, all right? And I know that's going to disappoint some of you because some of you hold deep convictions on this subject, and I applaud your convictions. I think it's a great conversation. It's just not one we're going to have today. And in the future, we're hoping to do a North Shore U class that specifically focuses on some of these kinds of issues, and we can explore those more exhaustively. What I want to do for today's purposes is speak more generally, if you'll indulge me. So resist the urge toward frustration and don't email me about it, okay? Here's the question I want to touch on today. Is there any reason to believe that there is some sort of design or master plan to the world and to our lives that might actually be key to figuring out what really matters? Or Is there evidence that supports this idea that we literally are here by chance and no other dynamic? Or to put it another way, today's talk, I'm not as interested in the how of creation. It's for another day. I want to talk about whether or not there's a who behind creation, okay? So not as concerned about the how today. I'm more interested in, is there a who? Who, right? You with me? And I also know as I get into this that we got a lot of smart people here. I mean, Seattle area is renowned for higher than average level of education, a lot of science types. And I'm going to acknowledge up front, I am not a scientist. I don't play one on TV, all right? Some of you have forgotten more than I will ever know about science. So I'm going to ask for a little grace here as I try to at least breach these subjects at least a little. So give me some grace, okay? Give me some grace, okay? All right. I was nervous there for a second. I thought this is going to be a long morning. So let me briefly explain why I think it is most reasonable to believe that there is a who behind the creation, to sort of build a case for a creator. And this is all going to cycle back to some of the events of our day. A case for a creator. There are so many different ways that people have talked about this. I just want to look at a couple because our time is short. One is what's known as the idea of original cause. Original cause. It could be explained something like this. No, that's not a Pokemon, right? It's a bang, right? Up until about 90 years ago, there were a lot of scientists who simply believed that everything that is had always been, pretty much as it is. And then there were some scientists in the late 1920s who began to discover what they considered to be evidence of some sort of significant event that comes to be known as the Big Bang Theory. You've all heard of it, right? Now, I'm not here to argue whether or not that's how God did it. From my perspective, that's the how part. We're talking about the who part. I don't know. I wasn't there. Right? But because it's so widely accepted in our culture, let's just go with this as a sort of semi-given this morning. Will you stick with me here for a second? So let's say that the whole universe actually did have a beginning point. And you want to call it the Big Bang, you can call it what you want, I suppose. My question is, if it all started with a bang, where did the bang come from? What caused the bang? And people say, well, it was a collision of gases in space. Okay, where did the gases come from? We can do this all day, right? Where did the raw materials for whatever is now here, regardless of this or not, where did it come from? The question of origins, original cause. Science can explain a Big Bang for us, but they struggle at times, different theories out there, but struggle with a more concise and unified explanation as to where all those gases and matter and energy and all that stuff came from. That's a struggle. Now, the Bible answers that question in the opening line of its text, because it claims that there was a God who existed even before this creation. And I know that's a hard concept, this concept of eternity, because we've only ever known things that have starts and finishes. But Genesis 1:1 famously says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." The idea is that this God, who has always existed, who is eternal, no beginning or end, he created the world out of nothing, which is how many who fall into this conviction that there is a who, and the Bible reveals them, that's what they would explain. And that's where this stuff came from. It came from God. You see, this issue of origins, this original cause, it's something that we all have to wrestle with. You have to think it through. Even the most brilliant scientists, and they've come up with some pretty creative explanations. Even the great Stephen Hawking, his explanation is a multitude, many multiplicity of universes. And so the odds are enhanced because there are so many universes, we just happen to be the one in whatever the number is. It's hard to find evidence for that. We haven't seen life in other places in different processes that's new, maybe. But this issue of origins, of original cause, it has been studied and debated and dissected, and people have lost sleep over this because many believe it's one of the most compelling evidences that there is some kind of a creator. In the beginning, God created what is. But there's another compelling argument. Again, just as I said, we're being brief on these. Another compelling argument that I find, if not as, maybe even more so compelling, that rather than things all happening by random chance, the idea is that there is incredible complexity in creation. Such complexity. And one of the best examples of this is one of these. Everybody know what that is? It's not a Pokemon ball. That's an eyeball, all right? I'll give you some eyelashes to kind of freak you out. Some sort of big nightmarish thing happening here. It's Mike Iwinski is what it is, right? You guys foot down here and all that. Okay, never mind. Anyhow, it's an eyeball. This has been talked about by many, many people. The human eye is only 1 inch in diameter, but think about it. It can see as far away as a distant star, billions of miles away, and then in the very next moment, refocus on something as tiny as the little blueberry skin that was stuck on my tooth when I got into my office this morning, right? It's always me that has that happen. Now, the refocusing capability of the human eye is something that has not been recreated by any technology. This little 1 inch eyeball has 130 million parts, sending millions of impulses to the brain every second to provide this unbelievable thing that so many of us take for granted, vision. Now stop for a minute and ask, sincerely, is it more likely that this eyeball resulted from some sort of intelligent design or direction, or by a mere accident of gases colliding in random natural selection? Really, which is the more reasonable explanation? Even Darwin himself conceded that this was a challenge. In The Origin of the Species, chapter 6, he writes this. He says, "To suppose that the eye with so many parts all working together could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree." You say, Charles Darwin said that? Yes, he said that. That's in Origin of the Species, a direct quote. Now, he goes on in that chapter to explain that while he can't fully explain it, he does trust that one day reason will bring an answer, which sounds a lot like faith to me, right? Let's be honest. Because none of us were there as firsthand witnesses for really any of this, every one of us is proceeding at some level on faith. We're giving it our best guess, and those guesses have consequences. Now, there are many different approaches to make the argument that the design and complexity of creation points to the existence of God. Because how can there be a design without a designer? How can there be a creation without a creator? We just know that. When you see a 787 sitting on the runway at SeaTac, what's more reasonable to conclude? Did that aircraft just randomly form together when a tornado blew through a junkyard one day? Or did it have an army of engineers and fabricators and designers and programmers and so on and so forth, all working up at Boeing, right? When you walk into an office and you see a new computer on your desk, do you celebrate that your paper clips have finally gotten their act together, right? Or do you say, oh, great news, the budget was approved, right? I got my new computer. What are the odds that the tremendous order and design in this world could happen by chance? A scientist, a man of faith, named Dr. Walter Bradley, professor at Baylor, he wrote this. He said, "The mathematical odds of assembling a living organism are so astronomical that nobody, according to him, nobody still believes that random chance accounts for the origin of life. If you took all the carbon in the universe and put it on the face of the earth, allowed it to chemically react at the most rapid rate possible and left it for 1 billion years, the odds of creating just one functional protein molecule would be 1 chance in 10 with 60 zeros after it." That's a novum decillion is what that is. 1 in a novum decillion. I looked it up, right? Got it on the internet, so I don't know if it's true or not, but it's what that says, all right? That's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of zeros. That's for 1 protein molecule. Now think about how many billions of molecules are in each of our bodies right now. and think about how unique their function, how fine-tuned their function. Certainly not perfect, because there's broken pieces of us, right? That's for another conversation. Sin affects us at a deep level. But when you consider billions of molecules that make up human life, the sheer physiological wonder of eyes and ears and skin, or sense of touch and smell, move into things like our relational capacity, our emotional abilities, our mental capabilities. Doesn't it take a lot more faith to see these things resulting from random occurrences than to believe that we were custom designed by some kind of designer? I mean, can you imagine a mother looking into the face of her newborn baby and saying, "My, what a lovely random collision of gases," right? No, there's gas involved, but it's a different kind of gas, right? Other arguments could be made. There's the anthropomorphic argument, which basically is that the things on this earth are so perfectly fine-tuned to support human life that it's unbelievable. Again, the odds, astronomical. A little more gravity, every living thing would be crushed. A little less gravity, we'd fly right off the face of the planet. A little closer to the sun, we'd fry. A little farther away, we'd freeze. And yet all of these different dynamics, the exact amount of oxygen, that if there was just a few percent higher of oxygen, random fires would break out to the degree that it would be almost unsurvivable, and just a few percentage points lower of oxygen in our atmosphere, and we would suffocate. All these pieces, you could go on and on and on and on and on. This perfect arrangement. It's hard to find a good answer, at least out of some kind of intelligent design. So where does this intelligent design come from? Well, the Bible makes a claim. You can believe it or not, but the Bible makes this claim pointing to that creation as a signpost of something bigger. Famous passage in Psalm 19. The psalmist writes, David in this case writes, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world." David says, Rainier speaks. And when that cloud rolls away, and even after living here now for 5 years, and I round that corner and it takes my breath away, it inspires something in me. That's a message. It's a signal. It's a lure, you Pokemon Go players, right? There's something here. There's something here. Look closer. Explore more. You look at your kids when they're sleeping, or your grandkids. You spend a week in the Olympics. You go scuba diving in the Caribbean. You look up into the sky on a clear night. You calculate the odds of all that just happening by chance. We could go on and on and on. My point is this: regardless of the how of creation, it is reasonable to believe there is some who behind all that we see. And if there's a who behind that, maybe we'd be wise to explore that further. Because maybe there's a story connected to that who. Maybe there's something bigger going on. And maybe the key to figuring out our lives is to figure out something about that who. Because if we're accidents, then what makes people any more valuable than an earthworm? Well, people would say, well, it's what they can do, clearly. The capabilities of human beings, with their emotional capacities and so forth, put them so high above an earthworm that they deserve to be treated differently than an earthworm. So let me get this straight. A person's value is based on what they can or cannot do. Their value is based on their external abilities. Their extrinsic value would be the word, what they can do. Which also means, if I follow, that people that have greater capabilities, that are perhaps better looking or stronger, neither of which is a challenge that I've wrestled with in my life, that those people are more valuable because they can do more than those of us who may not be so good looking or so talented in those ways. But if we are actually valuable because of something else, if we're valuable because we have been intentionally made, then maybe there's something that is valuable about us no matter how we look or what our abilities are or what we even do. There's an intrinsic value to us that is not based on how good we are or how strong we are or how useful we are. We are valuable because we are specially, fearfully, and wonderfully made. That is the picture the Bible paints of God's love for us. Not an extrinsic value based on external capabilities, how good you are, but an intrinsic value where he sees you as his beloved creation and calls you home. So valuable, in fact, because how do you determine the value of something? The value of something is always determined by how much you pay for it. Your house right now is worth nothing until you sell it. And then you find out what it's worth, right? Only when a price is paid do you determine value. And the message of the New Testament is simply this. While we were yet sinners, not based on our outward extrinsic value, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. The price was paid by Christ for us. That's how valuable you are. Not based on how good or bad you are. Simply because Christ saw you as worthy of giving his life so that you could be welcomed home. That is your value. Because here's the truth, you are not some accident. This is what I've come to believe in my life. Your birth was no mistake or mishap. Your life, no fluke of nature. Your parents may not have planned you, but God did. You are the intentional creation of a loving Creator. You are the intentional creation of a loving Creator. And because of that, your life is precious. It's not something to be wasted or thrown away. It is a purpose-filled gift from the hand of the designer God. And your life is well spent figuring out what that purpose is and then chasing it with all of your heart. Paul's talking about this very thing. He has an audience of skeptical people. Famous scene in Athens. Acts 17. And explaining this, he says this, Acts 17:26. From one man he made every nation of men, all people, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he, God, determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. He says, there is a designer behind all this. This is all not just accident. There's a God who's laid this out intentionally. Why, you ask? Next verse. God did this so that people would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. He's erected all these signposts, all these signals, with the hope that it would spark a curiosity in us, a stirring in us that would make us want to ask more, to reach out more. Not to play some game where he's always one step out of reach, but the kind of game, not a game at all, the kind of thing where he is nearby waiting for us to reach out, no matter where we've gone or what we've done, to simply turn to him and reach out. Because as Paul says, he is not far from each one of us. Paul said, not only did God intentionally create us, but he wants us to reach out to him, and he wants to be found. He is near you, and he doesn't always make it easy. He doesn't keep us from hard times and pain. But even in the middle of all that stuff, he is not far off. You are loved. And maybe right now, this morning, you just needed to hear that. You are loved. He is not far off. He wants to be found if you'll just reach out for him. Because you were made for a purpose. And that purpose was to know this God who made you and to be part of helping others get to know him too. Because here's the implications. If you're not just an accident, then that means every other human being you have ever seen, they're not accidents either. They're not things. They're not demographics. They're not thems or those ones. They're us. They are created, valuable creatures of God, with value placed in them because of the price he was willing to pay to bring them life. They aren't accidents. And if we begin to embrace just this simple idea, to stop seeing people as things and instead see them as human beings, wouldn't that change mornings like this in Baton Rouge? Whatever the justification, whatever the motivation, whatever the anger, whatever the racial prejudice, whatever the tension, when we see each other as people instead of things, we handle ourselves differently. Do you see how this idea fuels? Do you see when we start treating people like things and not people, it changes everything? because we begin to treat each other with decency and respect. And we won't always agree, and it doesn't mean anything we want to do is right. But there is a basic level of decency and respect that every human being you have ever seen is deserving, because God himself has shown him that decency and respect. And I think this is an area, especially in times like these, where those of us who are followers of Jesus, who have met this God, we need to lead out in this world, not wait for our politicians to do it, not wait for other social organizations to do it, but for us as followers of Jesus to be the first ones to say, I don't understand, but I love you. Help me understand. How can I help? What can I do? There's this powerful passage in 1 John 4. It's acknowledging that this God is sometimes hard to find, but it prescribes a way that people can get to see him. Listen to what John says. 1 John 4, verses 11 and 12. It says, "Dear friends, since God so loved us, since you are known by God, created by God to be loved, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another, because they're loved too." Verse 12, "No one has ever seen God, how we wish we could, but no one has ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us." In other words, when we love one another, people see God in us, and they begin to wonder, maybe that love is real. Maybe it is true. Maybe that begins to change all the tensions around the deaths in Minnesota and Louisiana and Dallas and Orlando and Nice and Brussels and Baghdad and Istanbul. Our hearts break for those things, not just because of some sentimentality, not just because of some self-interest where we're afraid such violence might come to us. Our hearts break because we know every one of those lives counts. It has value because they are made by God. They are loved by God. When one hurts, instead of explaining why they shouldn't hurt like they do, we grieve, we listen, we figure out what it means to love. We do the hard work of figuring out what it means to love. And by doing this, we show a searching world far more compelling evidence than the eyeball that there's a designer. There's a God who has captured our hearts and is now pouring his love through us into this desperately hungry world. By doing this, we show a searching world that such a love exists and it can be found in Jesus. They're so valuable that this Jesus was willing to give their life for them, to bring healing and reconciliation, not to pretend those grievances don't exist, but to take those grievances on himself and say, let me bring peace. I'll trade you. I'll trade you. So let me wrap up by saying a quick word to two main groups of people. Maybe even three. First, to those who hear these kinds of arguments and you're picking apart what I'm saying and you're rolling my eyes at what a Neanderthal I sound like to you, okay, it's okay. I don't need you to like me. I would just challenge you to think about these questions. And if what I'm saying isn't compelling you, then seek out better answers. But questions of the complexity of creation and the origins of all that is, those are questions you got to think about answers to. But if you're willing to say, wait a second, if I'm honest, I have been living a life of extrinsic value. I only base my value on what I can do, what I'm good at. I do the same with other people. Maybe it's time to turn the page and allow yourself to be loved simply for being. To allow this Jesus who paid such a price to show you your value, to step into your life and to bring you the kind of hope that so many of us in this room have found. And maybe today's you need to do that. In fact, on your little response card, there's a tear off there, the very first mark. You can say, I want to take that step. I want to follow this Jesus. And you mark that. We'll follow up with you this week. We'll talk more about what that looks like and help however we can. Another group that I want to talk to are the people who are hurting right now. And you needed reminded perhaps today that even in the middle of your pain, God is not ignoring you. He is not looking the other way. The Bible says he is near to the brokenhearted. And even if he seems remote, I want to assure you he is nearby. Just hold on. Just hold on. Because even the pain you're enduring does not mean he has abandoned you. He is there. And he's sometimes quiet, and I don't get it, but he's there. And then finally, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, who are being reminded today of the value that he has seen in us and being willing to offer his son in our place, my challenge to you, especially on a day like today and in an era like this, to be aggressive agents of seeing that value in others. Any way you can, doing the hard work to figure out what it means to love, and not settling for the trite blurb answers that we see in the media, but to actually take intentional steps to say, how can I discover the value that God has placed in that person? How can I polish it and draw it out? How can I treasure and respect it? How can I listen, try to understand? On that response card, there's a place. I will pursue my God-given purpose, and I will focus on the God-given value of others. And if you mark those this week, I'll follow up, send you a couple of resources and a devotional. You'll be in my prayers this week, that you'll follow through on those things and somehow respond to the tide of darkness in our world and culture with the hope of Jesus. Because we need his hope. Because people aren't just accidents. They aren't just things. They aren't just stats. They're treasures. And God calls us to treasure them as well. So you bow your head with me. Let's pray about this. Oh, God. Oh, God. If we see headlines like this, and it hurts us, I can only imagine what it does to you. To see people you love doing harm to one another. And not just in the ways that get headlines, but in the subtle ways that happen in every family, in every home, in every life. God, we just acknowledge something's wrong. We tend to treat people like things instead of treasures. And yet you, God, you're so gracious, you're so patient, that even when we deserve thing treatment, you still respond to us with grace. So for those that are hurting, God, I pray you'll make yourself known. Let them find you. Give them that touch of hope. To those that are wrestling with these big questions but maybe don't even really believe, would you give them a hunger, God? Would you stir in them that craving that comes in seeing the majesty of what you've made and the complexity of all that is around us and so many other things? And for those of us who know you, God, who may be tempted to be content in our own little safe spot, reminded of how much you love us, would you disturb us enough to not only say thank you for the value you see in us, but to offer ourselves as available to help bring out the value in others, the beauty in others. Will you use us as a people in that way? That old song written in 1750s. You're the fount of every blessing. You're the source of all this, God. Our identity, our joy, what blessings we experience, it all comes from you and for you. So remind us of that, I pray, as we sing this song together in Jesus' name.